Hello and welcome to the Being and Becoming podcast. My name is Logan Hauer. I'm joined today by my two regular conversation partners, Austin Stone and Patrick Dyer. Fellas, how we doing?
Excellent.
Pretty good. Glad to be talking with you.
Today we will be discussing Chapter 11, Do Not Bother Children When They Are Skateboarding, from 12 Rules for Life and Antidote For Chaos by Jordan Peterson. And I thought we'd start off a little different today. I'm not going to do the whole overview, just kind of see where we end up and see how things go. But given the title of the chapter, I think we need to at least talk about skate parks a little bit. Austin and I have frequented skate parks since 2014, around 2014. And Austin, just wanted to turn it over to you to get some thoughts on the title of the chapter.
For sure.
Just the skating mentality, if you want to go through a little bit of that.
Definitely. So, I think it's very interesting how a lot of society in general might look at skateboarders as delinquents. And here at the beginning of chapter 11, Peterson is almost classifying them as a group of brave and noble individuals who are willing to take on scary, difficult tasks. So I think it's very interesting how he kind of flips that social stigma and is like, yeah, don't bother children when they're pushing the boundaries of chaos and order and working out that aggression that is so human. And man, I'm not that much of a daredevil, but I really have enjoyed learning how to skate in skate parks and drop in to bowls and nothing too fancy. I barely know how to grind, but it's always been fun to do that alongside Logan because my first job was at Sonic Drive-In, and I was a skater. And then Logan was into hockey, so that was his skating background. So that's kind of what got us into checking out skate parks and doing those things together. So
The good old days.
the good old days.
I have to say, for listener at home, Austin is very good and has only gotten better over time at skating. So Austin and I both rollerblade at the skate park, which obviously is not the most common thing you see there. Typically you see skateboarding, but Austin is at almost every park we've been to able to gain the respect of skaters, the skateboarders, other rollerbladers, bikers, whoever else is around. So he's very proficient with his aggressive inline skates. Your skills are definitely good.
I do love the social community public aspect of skate parks and how the skating community in general is fairly open because they are kind of gathered around this task of getting aggression out and pushing boundaries, and there's always something you can improve, so you can encourage everyone around. There is a spirit of competition sometimes, but that's really just for even more improvement. So I'm speaking pretty highly of skate parks here, but it is something I enjoy.
Right on. That was a fun little overview, but diving into the chapter itself, Austin, you had touched on a couple of the points that we see in the chapter about safety, danger, aggression. Do you think that's innate in us? Where do you guys think that comes from? Taking risk, even as young as children, how much should parents mitigate against that? There's a tension there, I think.
Oh my gosh, that's a tension that defines most of parenting itself, learning how to let your child, and there's different stages to that obviously, but letting your child learn for themselves, but also safeguarding them so that chaos won't impair or hurt them in future development. And I enjoyed Peterson's comment about how bad playgrounds are too safe, and that plays off of the skate park aspect and being able to be free in that. But yeah, it's so important for development to have creative freedom, but that is also obviously risking danger at the same time.
What are some adult equivalents, if there are any?
good question. Well, I mean, Austin and I still do hit up the skate park occasionally, so that would be
True.
a tempting answer. Maybe
I guess
adults shouldn't be doing that.
Fair point.
Patrick, do you think the weight rooms could be in that category?
Yeah, the weight room probably could be. That's a good point. Especially if it's something you want to get good at. It's going to take a lot of effort, determination, discipline, all that stuff. But pushing the boundary for sure, because you have to go to get better at something. You have to push real hard past a certain pain threshold. So that's kind of the
right. So the chaos confronted in the weight room can be described as controlled pain. You know.
Yeah.
You're not trying to tear your muscles, maybe in a micro sense, but
true. Yeah. But to get better, you do have to push past the pain.
As a homeowner and someone who's selling a house, I definitely think of house projects. Whether you're working with electrical, wiring, plumbing, or just any other really task, working with power tools, I think that's a pretty safe comparison for the adult equivalent. Even though it's not exciting in the same way skateboarding is, there is the exciting unknown of this project could fail at any time.
wow.
I could fall on my face figuratively. Whereas skateboarding, you're falling on your face literally, but there's that figurative sense of danger. I could fail at any time, and you're not only letting yourself down, but, you know, whoever, if you're married or you have kids, like, you could be letting down a number of people if you fail. So I've been very excited and stimulated by that, doing those sorts of projects over the last couple of years, being a homeowner. But that, in my mind, is kind of like an adult equivalent. It's the responsible version of, not that skateboarding's irresponsible, but it's a more responsible version of that danger seeking, going out into the unknown and conquering kind of mentality.
Well, that's integrating adult responsibilities, which I think is a good connection to make.
Definitely.
And the gym workout example that you had laid out, there's probably reputational costs at stake too, similar to skateboarding, where there are other people watching me, or I could have negative interactions depending on how I'm doing certain things, or at least that's the way you perceive it. Maybe no one cares what you're lifting or what workout you're doing, but you could perceive that someone might say something if your weight's too low or your technique's not good enough, you know, something like that.
That's also a good point.
Does that resonate, Patrick? Is your experience of the weight room more individualistic than that?
Yeah, for me, probably. But for most people, probably not.
Or maybe you just fly above the top. It's obvious you're the king of the jungle.
I wish.
Okay.
Probably in self-confidence, that's probably true. But
You're there to do what you got to do, and you don't care. Yeah, that's good. That seems pretty healthy.
And it's always easy to spot the ones who aren't like that. So
you can spot the Logans in there from a mile away.
I'm just talking about the Texans.
Oh, there we go. We can't go
it's all coming back.
Yeah. Oh boy.
We'll have to have a Texan on someday here to give us another perspective on the great state.
So something I enjoyed in chapter 11 was Peterson saying that we need to confront the chaos that helps us develop. And, you know, hopefully we can have the discernment to figure out what that is, you know. And usually responsibilities of the day can rear their head as chaos, daily chaos. Something that's helped me recently has been doing some breathing and cold shower exposure every morning, inspired by Wim Hof, if you've heard of the crazy guy from the Netherlands. But that's helped me to kind of treat the day as a way to take it on and confronting that chaos. And as I step into the cold shower, I'm learning how to be okay with that chaos, and different social anxieties I've dealt with, I'll be able to treat it kind of similarly. Like, okay, I don't want to do this, but it's similar to stepping into that cold shower. It's controlled chaos. Just breathe through it and get through it. And that's kind of helped me the past couple months actually. So
100% worth including. That's awesome. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, that definitely relates as far as putting yourself into quote unquote danger, or you could think of
Yeah.
danger as not comfortable,
yes,
not a comfortable place. You're going out into that and making sense of it, building resiliency from that. I think that definitely ties in. I wanted to transfer the topic a bit, though, towards something we were talking about before we started recording. That's in the realm of dreams. Because in this chapter, Peterson references Nietzsche, Freud, and Jung, and the different roles that they play in shaping the importance of dreams or the social implications they might have, or what they, I guess you could say, what they might tell us about ourselves. And I know for Yoon and Austin, this is where I'd be curious to get your opinions, because you've been reading some of Yoon's work. He talks a little bit about how every act of social propriety has an evil twin, the dark side. Maybe it's called a shadow self, or is that a
Yeah.
different term?
I think those are two different topics.
Okay. Are you familiar with
I'm familiar with
what
both.
he's saying?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Nietzsche, I think, ties in with defining resentment.
Yeah.
Yoon saying for every act in society, there's a counterpart, a motive. Maybe it could be a bad motivation for doing the thing, or a bad result of the act itself. I was unclear on that, but then Nietzsche talks about resentment. I would say the three of us are highly agreeable. That's something agreeable people need to keep in check, is resentment, because it can build, and if we're not expressing our thoughts and feelings, it can get bad. But wanted to maybe get your thoughts on that Yoon, Nietzsche, and Pat, you too. I'm sorry if I'm excluding you, but on the Yoon and Nietzsche, talking about motivation, all that sort of stuff from around the 287, 290, like those kind of pages. For the listener at home, if anyone's following along, that's how far we are in the book now. So we're getting towards the end.
So, my novice thoughts on comparing Nietzsche and Carl Jung would be Nietzsche seemed to have a more pessimistic view. So I think what Jung considered the shadow self, the darker motivations, the more selfish motivations, Jung considered that something that needs to be integrated into the self, the capital S self. But Nietzsche, I think, in my opinion, sees that dark shadow as the self as a whole. So he's saying people only ever do good things for selfish reasons. Jung is saying we have these darker motivations that we need to recognize and not be afraid of, and integrate them and realize, I have aggression. I have the capability to kill somebody. That's scary. I don't really want to admit that. But if I can recognize that and integrate that and realize that I am a dangerous person, that can help me move forward instead of turning that away. Jungian psychology talks a lot about if you're turning away from something, that's your psyche, that's going to grow in your psyche. It's going to try to get your attention. And dreams are a way to try to get your attention about what's growing and what you're ignoring, because that apparently gives power to that shadow side that you're not facing. So I'll stop there. I hope that made sense.
I think that was a perfect breakdown of what I was trying to articulate. Yeah. So Nietzsche would be saying every person has the negative reasoning or motivation behind what they're doing.
Yes.
Even if it's under the pretense of I'm doing this because of X, Y, and Z good reasons. I'm doing this because to help the poor. There would be some kind of negative motivation as well occurring at the same time simultaneously. Whereas Yoon would be saying, yeah, there could be bad motivations for doing things, or even bad thoughts, bad dreams, but it's important to confront those, understand them so we can understand more about ourselves. If we ignore them, they're going to come up later and give us problems. Is that a fair summary, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. And it seemed that Nietzsche found that the only thing that was really honorable was the will to power. You know, putting your will forward. And he considered Jesus as a weak individual because that selflessness was weak to him. I know these are terribly novice opinions on a very deep philosopher, so please forgive me. I'm not going into the complexity of it. But something I do want to wrestle with is, how does a Jesus follower possibly glean any wisdom from Carl Jung's thought on the shadow self? Because we see from Paul's writings a call to deny the flesh. So, is the flesh different from the shadow self? Can we just toss away Jung's thoughts as Christians because we just need to deny the shadow self because that's our flesh, that's our nature? Or is there something a little bit more complex there?
I like where you're going with this question. My thought would be, the flesh, even though you're denying it, you're in Christianity, if you're denying your flesh, you're still confronting it, are you not? You're still thinking about it.
Yeah, I would say so.
Whereas I think the shadow self, in Jung's terminology, it's something that you're maybe putting off or not dealing with. Which, to be fair, I think you could do with the flesh, quote unquote, the flesh. I guess maybe we should define that for the listener, if you're still there. The flesh is, in the Christian religion, is seen as the world and the challenges that distract you from the vision that is following Christ and living your life in accordance to him and his teachings.
A life apart from the Creator.
Better, even better. When we're talking about the flesh, that's what we're meaning. And I think Christians would be well aware of the flesh, its temptations, their shortcomings. I think that they would be aware of them. Maybe that is a question. To what extent are they dealing with them?
But also keep in mind, the flesh isn't just the way of the world. It's also a lot of biological impulses you have of yourself. It's not just, it pertains to yourself more than it actually probably does others. Most sins Paul is talking about are usually your own desires. And it ranges from eating food to not doing anything. So there's a lot in that too.
That's a really good point, Patrick. I think Carl Jung's thoughts on the shadow self has helped me because I'm realizing many Christians have trouble dealing with shame. Shame usually has its power when you're hating yourself, and it helps if you can realize, hey, I'm a human being that deals with aggressive impulses. I'm a human being that deals with sexual impulses. This is a part of being human, right? And the shame I feel from sinning in a violent, aggressive or angry or sexual way is not living in the Spirit. But I want to realize that that's human, and I want to realize that that's a part of who I am. And there are parts of my aggression and my sexuality that the Holy Spirit wants to work in with me. So when I'm denying my flesh, I'm not denying my aggression. I'm not denying my sexuality from a human standpoint. I think you could possibly say that the Holy Spirit is asking us to integrate that in service to the Spirit, not in service to the flesh.
So, in your view and what you've just surmised, you would say that the Jung teachings on the shadow self and etc. would relate or maybe even parallel to the Christian teaching of battling the flesh, or the concept of the flesh?
I think it's possible. I also am willing to hear Christians' concerns about trying to integrate, the secular psychologist's view on this. I understand concerns of that. But I think I'm the opinion that there's wisdom in his teachings on the shadow self. Because it is such a kind of a human, biologically based teaching. It's not biblically Jesus following based. We need to realize that too, but I think there's wisdom there.
Kind of growing out from the self, shadow self, flesh, all of that. We've been focusing on the self, the way we perceive ourselves, and the way the self perceives the world. What did you guys think of this chapter in dealing with a lot of other relationships extending outwards, including motherhood, family, society, culture, gender? There's a lot of different areas that Jordan's covering in this chapter. I think one of the issues I found interesting, if we're talking about people, and this was a small aside in the book, but I just wanted to throw it out there to see if you guys had any thoughts about overpopulation and environmental issues. Because it's maybe a small snippet on a page or two, but the idea, there seems to be two ideas from the way I understand it in the public contending with the environment. It's that we're not doing enough, we need to conserve more, we need to stop growing and making things, we're running out of space, we're running out of things, we're running out of food. And then there's the other side of that token, or that argument, that I think Jordan's more in line with in this chapter, which is that how do we make the best with the things we do have? Let's not focus on limiting our supplies or reducing population sizes, because we could end up with something like Mao's Cultural Revolution. I just wanted to get maybe some of your guys' thoughts, if any, you had on these environmental issues that Jordan's bringing up. I understand it's brief. Maybe you didn't even have notes on it, but just wanted to get some thoughts.
So, interestingly enough, I'm a substitute teacher for a Christian school at the moment, and we went over Mao's Cultural Revolution last week. So I want to make a direct comment about the environmental activism. So I have noticed a common theme among political left groups that there's so much emphasis on environmental activism, and it talks so much about people and humans, consumption being such a problem, that it's almost as if the solution is to decrease population, and it almost is this nihilistic approach that humans are a plague, that humans are the problem. But I recently come across a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and this woman, she's an indigenous, Native American indigenous biologist. So I forget which tribe she was from, but she has this very interesting perspective of how can we work with the earth. And she has like a biology class where she asked her students, hey, can you think of any scenarios where humans can work with the earth in a positive manner? And they couldn't, because all they're in touch with is the problems that humans have created for the environment. And she's like, hold on, there's a whole vast storehouse of knowledge amongst indigenous people who know how to work with creation and know how to contribute to it in a way that contributes back. And just kind of the idea of the tree that gives us the ability to breathe, and hopefully we can help plant more trees. Something as simple as that. Like, is that not an example of us working with the earth instead of trying to be this, let's just scale back humanity to fix the environmental problem? It can be very nihilistic.
Right. It doesn't seem like a winning strategy. And Jordan, I think, termed it in the book as anti-human, even. Just the fact of the first and easiest thing shouldn't be to limit the population. There was a podcast I listened to this past weekend, and it talked about how amazing it was that the indigenous people in North America lived here for, I think it was something close to 10,000 years. And there was only one species of animal that went extinct. And from what they can measure or tell, there was one flightless duck, I think, that went extinct over that time period. Whereas if you look at Europe, the Europeans obviously had so much disease, and nothing is almost grown in Europe anymore. There's like the land's just overtaken by people. And he talked about the differences in belief. So a predator in North America, say a bear, is viewed as almost like a sacred animal because it does something that's so powerful that they revere and respect. But in Europe, you have a lot of farmers that go through the Christian faith or belief that view predators as evil. So you have to defend your flock against those creatures, and it's about maximizing what you have and growing. And whereas the native people of the Americas were more interested in leaving nature as it was and admiring it, not viewing it as something that needs to be conquered. And you can even look in Genesis in the Old Testament. That's one of the... Pat, you might have to help me out with this, but I think it's basically saying something along the lines of going out and maintaining or subduing something, conquering the earth and multiplying generations. I think that was a promise to Abraham. Yikes, I might need fact checked on this, boys, but
definitely interesting thoughts. Yeah, I don't have anything positive to say, unfortunately, about the groups that are claiming these things, just because I agree with Jordan Peterson. It's definitely anti-human, and it's not that they care about the environment. It's literally they just hate people. It's just obvious to see, and claiming otherwise doesn't hold much merit to me, just because there's no obvious evidence that they really care. I mean, just lobbying and acting and saying you care and shouting about it really does nothing. They know that. We all know that. It's not like it's not obvious.
Would you say that's true of a subsect of the environmentalists that are saying we need less humans, overpopulation?
If anybody says that, I like how Jordan Peterson says, if we need less humans, start with yourself first.
Yeah.
I will second that. That is the worst thing to say.
It's not realistic, right? You can't control that.
It's definitely not realistic, but people have tried.
Do one-child laws. No one's stopping you.
That's fair.
Well,
that's
not
a good
no
point.
one, but yeah.
But it's not that we shouldn't try to do everything we can for the environment, because we should, but often the things that would be beneficial for actual land is not profitable for the government. And therefore nothing will ever change beneficially. Even the party that's doing this, they'll never do anything if it's not profitable or if it doesn't involve control over people.
This is a complex issue for me. So if my goal was to try to follow Jesus' lead on navigating all these issues, I would hope to walk up to the people who are anti-human and say, hey, thank you for identifying the negative impact that humans have had on the earth. It's good to talk about it. But can we not see here how humans are made in God's image and how there's value there? And he's given us responsibility to rule over the earth. I'm not sure if I would use the word conquer. I listened to an interesting word study on the Hebrew of that, but I'd have to listen to it to regurgitate what they said. Anyway, then I would walk over to the conservatives who are against this, and I would say, hey, is there any part of you that's against this that's trying to defend the greediness of your businesses? You know, I'm just thinking about corporations who take advantage of environmental pollution to make more money. Okay, let's make sure we're not motivated by greed when it comes to treating the environment. So just trying to approach all sides with a balanced approach, because I understand the extreme views of both sides are worth being criticized, but it's hard when you stand on one side and justify that with the extreme views of the other. So oh my goodness, yeah, I don't think it's good to be anti-human, but oh my goodness, I also don't think it's good to continue to create pollution for a corporation's sake.
Well said.
So
It's tough too because when the Industrial Revolution is going on, it's not something people are aware of. But then once you become aware of the issue, yeah, you don't want to perpetuate it. What's the responsibility of who, where, when, how much do you alleviate it?
I'm not trying to pick too many bones here, but I do want to back up a little bit. When you were saying people were unaware of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, I do want to say I think the indigenous populations were aware of the effect that clearing out a bunch of land to farm one crop, they understood what that was doing. They understood that that wasn't good, you know? So it depends on your priorities. If your priorities, which is, it's common for indigenous cultures for a priority to be working with the earth. If that's your priority, you're going to be aware of what building a factory would be like. But if your priority is to gain and create more capital and compete with other countries that are trying to do the same, then you're right. You're not going to be aware of its effect on the environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I would also say the point of the Industrial Revolution in my mind is to get out of poverty, get the world out of poverty.
Right. Okay. That's a good, yes. Thank you for saying that.
But to your point, if the indigenous people know how to live off the land way better than the settlers did, then that's not going to be a priority to them because they're fine with the resources that they have. But if you don't have the knowledge, or if you're dying of sickness and living in privation, you're going to want to like get out of that. And to your point, maybe even if you know something you're doing is bad, you're just worried about living and not dying. But then, yeah, there comes a point where, and we're muffling through history now, I apologize, but there comes a point where you realize, yeah, hey, that thing we're doing is not good, we should change it. And then it's not perfect, but yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be someone to advise on that, but I just thought it was interesting that topic came up, like the environment. I just thought that overpopulation, I've heard that argument come up a number of times and thought it was worth discussing.
If I could just kind of point back how we've talked about, there are some left-leaning politics that talk about the frustrations with the environment, or like all that is kind of a disguise for hating humans, and like we said, and being anti-human. I think this also relates to kind of hating the rich too. So one of the questions that I really enjoyed from Peterson was, do you like the poor or do you just hate the rich?
Yeah.
And another point was, disguising resentment against the rich with pity for the poor is not honorable.
And that actually almost ties into what we're talking about with Nietzsche or Jung, even with what is the shadow self? What do you secretly desire when you're doing this thing in the name of doing something good? And along those lines, Austin, I had written down something I had never heard of before in this chapter with the Khmer Rouge, I think is how you pronounce it.
Oh, yeah.
In Cambodia.
Yes,
I was not
that.
aware of that. I think that follows the same kind of mindset. We're doing something in the sake of knowing it's the best good for all people in the society.
Which was killing the educated, right?
The way that it was spun, again, just from reading this chapter, was that the farmers do the most important work, so we should only have a farming society. There should be no more bankers or credit lenders. Any of those office jobs are not important. We need to have farmers because they do all of the meaningful work. But I think the person that wrote that paper, maybe they really meant what they're saying, but there could have been some bad actors that in these other shadow motivations, I'm saying in air quotes, these hidden agendas, maybe that it was a power grab or a money grab or
being jealous,
something of that nature, being jealous. because then they made everybody equal, but they drove everybody into poverty. And I didn't write down the number, but a lot of people died working in those fields for the sake of farming, because that was seen as the valued occupation.
Logan, that was very similar to Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, and that was the most deaths in history, more than Hitler and more than Stalin. Was under Mao's rule. So just this idea that let's get rid of the people in the universities because they need to get in the fields and understand what it means to be working class, and really trying to eliminate any sort of capitalistic behavior because that's greedy and that's not for the community, has proven to be dangerous in history. So I think it's really important to take some of the warnings that Peterson gives in this chapter. I put my hands up and say, right on, Peterson, you're right. We can't shoot for equal outcome. But I would push back against some of his stuff with, but can we not honorably push for equal opportunity?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I had highlighted something along the lines of opportunity, along the lines of him saying, we do not know what it would cost, considering level of wealth or level of education, to make a better transformation in the life of a person, which is difficult because we do want everyone to have equal opportunity, with the expectation that, okay, there aren't going to be equal outcomes. Even if everyone's given an equal opportunity, life happens, decisions are made, poor decisions could be made, maybe the outcome isn't achieved. But if we give everyone the same opportunity, that's at least a starting place. And I highlighted that little bullet point because I had never thought about what does an equal opportunity look like in terms of wealth and education. How much education is considered equal, or how much investment into a community or for a specific person would guarantee that they get an equal opportunity at life or at achieving a dream or working. So I totally agree with what you're saying as far as we need to provide people with equal opportunity. But my gears got spinning because I was wondering what would that equal opportunity look like? How, like, cost-wise, education-wise. There are probably other dimensions too that spill out into this. Those were the two he focused on in this chapter in that one sentence.
What a good point, Logan. It is impossible to create equal opportunity. So maybe I would like to rephrase it, and I think it's honorable as Jesus followers to think about the communities that face the most inopportunity. So Jesus points our eyes to the orphans, the widows. These are people who they didn't get into these situations by their own choice, but they have less opportunity if they only have a mother and not a father. They have less opportunity if their husband died. So how can we care for these communities that are, their opportunities are limited and they need the community to get around them? So I do think you're right. It is dangerous to start thinking, how can we create equal opportunity? Well, there's so many variables, and how much time do we have to put in before we figure out who is not working hard enough and who is? And you're right. That was a point in the book I had trouble understanding. You helped me understand that. So I appreciate you saying that.
And I think as someone that's interested in math, economics, and just from reading this chapter, I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just very costly to determine how much investment's required to be considered equal opportunity. Although I do think it's a question worth investigating. And I think over the last 60 years, we're definitely experimenting with it as a nation in America, but I don't know if we're any closer to solving that question than we were 60 years ago.
What's something we've been doing that's showing we've been pursuing that?
School vouchers is one thing, giving kids in lower income neighborhoods opportunities to go to nicer schools. Ohio has some kind of bill going around about a voucher program. I haven't looked into it. I just saw something in the mail. But then also subsidized housing, basically the voucher system is subsidized education. So the government's trying to get in and making it more affordable for disadvantaged people to have the same opportunity. But obviously that's not been a perfect system, I don't think, or at least it hasn't produced the outcomes we would have hoped for, and maybe hasn't even provided the opportunity to people that we would have hoped for. But those are just a couple examples of actions that are being taken as a nation to try to invest in some of those areas. Like Austin had said earlier, it's a complex issue with a lot of variables. It's not just one policy could fix everything type of issue. There's a lot of cultural topics discussed within this chapter. Talks about universities, postmodernism, culture, and hierarchies. There's a lot of discussion about gender as well, which I'm mostly disinterested in, I will say. Some of the things I think, with the time we have remaining, that I would be interested in talking about would be agreeableness, confrontation, and the Oedipal Mother. Is that how you say that word?
Edible, as far as I've heard it on podcasts, I think.
Edible, you said?
Edible is how you would pronounce it. Like something that's edible, but that's not how you spell it.
Oh, edible. Okay, the Oedipal Mother.
Yes. Maybe with a T, but it sounds like, edible or edible. So it's just this idea that biologically, it's the mother's role to care and nurture for the child. And sometimes that can be taken too far because too much protection devastates the developing soul. Is a quote I got from Peterson.
I wrote that one down too. The way he sets it up in the chapter is pretty harrowing. The Oedipal mother lives only for the child, lets the child age without really maturing, and the child does not have to take on responsibility, but at the same time they could become bitter because they're not growing and, as we were talking about earlier, taking on that dangerous task or that new adventure. There's doesn't seem to be a lot of that for the child.
Because you can't find meaning without that.
Right. And just talking about Hansel and Gretel, I had never thought about that story in years, and definitely not in the depth in which he's analyzing it here in this chapter. I've always thought of the children are being captured, taken advantage of by a witch. But really, the way he kind of interprets it is a well-intended mother, basically, that's giving the children too much freedom or dessert, what have you, without the required responsibility to indicate they're achieving or rewarding anything in life. And then Gretel kicks the witch into the fire, frees the brother, and they reunite with the father, who's repentant and changes his ways from leaving his children out in the woods.
There's a lot of archetypes there.
Yeah. Crazy.
For some reason, all that stuff just makes me think of how valuable the yin and yang symbol is. And of course, Jordan talks about it all the time, but it really summarizes, one, the book well, and everything and two, everything we've talked about.
Yeah, having that balance. You don't want to have too much of a good thing, too much of a bad thing. You need to have the responsibility, which is viewed as maybe bad or negative in the moment, but it produces a good result in discipline, determination, the ability to have success in the world and take on challenges, overcoming adversity.
I think it's important to recognize the parts of yourself, and we kind of tie it back into what we've said before, but it's important to recognize the parts of yourself that could potentially become too chaotic or too sinful, and just recognizing that the Holy Spirit wants us to integrate that. right? So the yin and yang, so the order and the chaos. And are we walking that line with the Holy Spirit and asking for guidance in that way? I think is a healthy Christian perspective to take when it comes to like trying to find balance in this complicated life.
That's a great full circle there, Austin. Talking about the integration with the Holy Spirit. We had brought that point up earlier too. Or you had brought that point up earlier with the shadow self and some of Jung's teaching, relating that with the flesh. Now we're bringing it back here later at the end of the chapter, or at the end of the discussion of the chapter, sorry, and talking about living balanced, responsible lives. I don't know how much we really want to get into motherhood, but not being too overprotective of your children, letting there be a little danger, a little excitement, and ultimately they need to go out into the world, which is not, I don't think that's easy for mothers to do, because you have to let your kid be independent, but then there's also the emotional distress of them going off and going out and getting hurt. I can imagine that being difficult.
I think a good quote that sums that up, and I think Peterson has said it, or maybe it was Carl Jung in that camp, was every good mother is bad. So that tension is so intense that every good mother is going to wrestle with the fact that I have to become a bad mother, or I have to stop what I've been good at, which is caring for my children in order for them to be prepared for the world. So it's like, man, how do you figure out when to stop protecting, when to let them go? And you know that hurts you because you know they could be in danger, and there's real danger out there, but how much are you willing to be okay with so that they can grow? And at what age do you do that? And oh my goodness, that parenting is a mess in trying to figure that out.
Man, well said. Yeah, there needs to be a tension there.
Yes. Yeah, if you have the answer, then I'm concerned, kind of thing.
Jordan's mother had a great quote that he put at the end of the chapter, or towards the end of the chapter, and she said something about, if home was too good, you would never leave. And how difficult that probably has to be for a mother to say as well.
Yeah. Why would you want to leave if it's too good?
Exactly.
That's the point. But why as the parent would you not want it to be that way?
That's what, Austin, I think you've hit so beautifully, is that duality. You want to make a great home and a great environment for the child to grow up in, but you also have to be quote unquote bad, or leave room for unexpected things, or leave room for danger for them to go out into the world and fall.
Where that becomes super unhealthy is when the mother is juxtaposing the goodness of the home with the badness of the outside world. So it is so good here, it is so safe here, it's so dangerous out there. That's actually kind of a self-serving motivation from a mother, because she wants to keep loving, and that's the Oedipal Mother, that she wants to keep loving, wants to keep protecting, but then, demonizing the outside world is stunting the growth of the child.
Yeah, and I think he had referenced a couple of fairy tales or child stories, Sleeping Beauty and Little Mermaid, and I think there were some other references or examples, but the child, I can't remember their names. Say it's the Little Mermaid, whatever her name is. Triton, I remember his name. Ariel. There we go. Ariel. There'll be a quiz at the end of this podcast. So Ariel is safe and protected under Triton, her father, but she needs to go out into the world where it's unsafe, and there's a witch, Ursula, awaiting to trap and ensnare her, but she needs to go out regardless and conquer that. I think I'm touching around this point, but not hitting it exactly. Taking that concept and applying it to real life, your everyday life, I imagine would be a lot harder. We've been on the child side where we're growing up, and I would say our parents didn't frame the world to us as evil, malevolent, terrible place to be, even though it has all those potentials and qualities about it. I think our parents let us confront those realities, come to terms with them in our own way, become more independent. But also, home was not unsafe. You know, we all grew up in good homes, but
Well said.
the world was seen as an opportunity or potential. It wasn't seen as something we needed to be safeguarded from. And even I think that movie's called Tangled, where the parents try to keep the daughter in from all this stuff, and then she gets taken. Or I'm really bad to be recapping Disney movies, but you know, something like that, where whenever in the story of the movie the parents try very hard to protect the child from the world, it ends up going terribly awry in those kind of archetypical stories.
That's the story of Buddhism, too.
Yeah.
Buddha's dad was trying to protect him from the outside world to create him to be the enlightened one. But he was like, you know what? I don't want this if I'm not going to be able to understand how these people and why these people are suffering.
Great tie-in.
So a good summary might be to say, to grow and to experience, you must have freedom.
And responsibility.
Yes, definitely.
I guess you could say responsibility is a prerequisite to freedom. You could make that argument too, I think. But, like, can you have freedom without having responsibility, without it being chaos?
Oh, huh. That's an interesting question.
It is. It is an interesting question. If you're from the parents' perspective, most parents, at least that we grew up with and around, would say, like, you have to show you're responsible before you can have the freedom to do this. I don't know if that's... I wonder how beneficial that is, really.
You can definitely be irresponsible with freedom. So I think it's possible for freedom to come first and then irresponsibility with that. But then that freedom starts to de-escalate. You get less freedom after you've been irresponsible with it.
Interesting. Maybe it's not a prerequisite, but there's definitely a relationship between the two.
Oh, for sure.
Freedom and responsibility, yeah.
So it's still safe to say perhaps the best way to grow, to develop, is to have been given freedom, to have freedom.
Yeah, you have to have freedom to grow and to develop. Yes.
I agree with that too. I don't think you can, not that you can't, you will be limited in the amount that you can grow until you're fully experiencing the weight of your own decisions.
Whoa.
Which would be freedom. And I will say, I know we're getting short on time here, so I just wanted to throw out there if you guys had any last closing points, ideas, anything. Austin's good, indicating he's good. Patrick's good. The only thing we didn't touch on was agreeableness, but that was more of a personal revelation for me anyhow, so I'm at peace with that. I think we have a great show.
Okay, Mr. Agreeable.
Yeah, it's like, I wanted to talk about agreeableness, but then I do the most agreeable thing you can do. Oh. Thank you for tuning in to this week's book club discussion. Please let us know if you have any suggestions as to books we should read or topics we should discuss by contacting us at beingbecomingpodcast@gmail.com. We hope you join us next week for another conversation.